I guess there's more than one way to get steamy in the Tundra. Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you determine, is it worth reading of a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. Ice Planet Barbarians is a book written by Ruby Dixon and published on April 3rd of 2015. The book itself has no awards of which I could find. However, it has... Jesus! 20 sequels? That's like 3 books a year. My God! Okay, well... Anyways, apart from that, the only thing I could possibly talk about in this background is the book's background, is that it was very heavily recommended by booktok back in the day. I say back in the day, but I think it was only like 3 years ago. And this was one of those books that everyone was recommending, everyone should read. I even saw a couple bigger YouTubers talk about it back before I even started my channel. The one that comes to mind the most is Amanda the Jedi. I'll put a link down to her review down below, but I haven't personally watched any of them because it just didn't seem all that interesting to me at the time. But without further ado, here's my report card on the book. And let's go on to the cover. Simply put, I find this cover beautiful. Yeah, no, it's gorgeous. It's a nice drawn cover. What is our main character, Georgie, standing in front of who is supposed to be Vectal, the main love interest, as you can kind of see a UFO in the background, while the area around them is the Tundra asteroid / planet they're on. Now, obviously, the colors are beautiful. The art, I just really love the art style. The primitive spear that Georgie holds kind of tells you what kind of level of technology is on this planet just at a glance. And honestly, you get a decent idea of what the book's going to be about. The back is also pretty good. It's not as interesting, but unlike most backs, which just do a kind of a blank background or replicate the background from the front onto the back and like flip it or something, this one tries to do something interesting. The synopsis is contained within a diamond shape, while you got a green corner and a yellow corner for good, contrast. On the lower right-hand side, you got Vectal, I'm assuming it's Vectal, hiking through the snow, while on the upper left-hand side, you have the UFO flying off. But overall, this cover is actually really good. It's one of those covers I wish more books would do. This is the kind of cover I look at and think, that's got to be a good book, because the cover is good. Now, obviously, that's not true. The saying, don't judge a book by its cover, has a meaning for a reason. As for the synopsis, as I read in my TBR, check out my TBR if you want to see the synopsis read aloud. As I read in the synopsis, the premise of this is rather simple, so to speak. Basically, our main character, a woman named Georgie, is kidnapped along with several women by aliens who want to sell them as slaves. However, due to some unfortunate circumstance that they don't know about, the aliens are forced to drop them off on an asteroid planet kind of thing. It doesn't really specify too much. It's basically a frozen tundra. Now, Georgie, who has sort of become the unofficial leader of the group, decides that despite her injury, she's going to go out and try to find some help. After all, the planet is breathable, so there must be something here that can help them. While she's out looking for help, she gets caught in a trap of a hunter, and meets said hunter, a giant blue devil-like alien. It's got horns, a tail, named Vectal. Vectal is infatuated with her almost at first glance, and from his point of view, we realize that he sort of mentally bonded with her upon seeing her. It's something I'll go into later, but through the language barrier, Georgie and Vectal have to work together to try and save the women of the tribe while also keeping Vectal in his pants. That doesn't last very long, but yes, this is an erotica, by the way. But yeah, from there, that's basically where the story is focused on. It's focused on trying to save the women that was left behind, while also burgeoning relationship between Vectal and Georgie. Before I really get into the review part of my video, I'm going to make something clear. I do not read erotica normally. I can probably count on one hand the amount of published erotica I've read, let alone the amount I own. In fact, As you guys saw on my TBR, I didn't actually know this was an erotica until I picked it up. I thought it was kind of a goofy, fun book that everyone just kind of fell in love with due to its charm. Because of that, I'm going to say whatever I say in this video as a critique, I want you all to take with a slight pinch of salt. I don't really know what constitutes a good erotica and what constitutes a good... for its genre. What constitutes a good erotica for its genre. So I'm going to be looking at this almost purely from the sake of just as a book rather than as an erotica. And because of that, it could come off as a little unfair compared to the average erotica. I gotta stop saying erotica. It's starting to sound weird. But anyways, yeah. Basically, keep that small preface in mind as I do my review. Now, to talk about the book, Ice Planet Barbarians is a good book to a degree. I personally enjoyed a lot about this book. One of my favorite things is how Dixon would often write from Vectal's point of view. This book is told in first person, so we get switched between Vectal's and Georgie's point of view, but they're both told in the first person. Now, normally that kind of writing bugs me a lot. It's actually one of the reasons I couldn't enjoy this A Song in Silence by Elizabeth Kerner, because there was so many first-person point of views by the end of the book that it was just confusing to constantly switch between them. However, on the bright side, what this one does is each point of view is a sole chapter by itself. You don't switch in the middle of the chapter, and you get outright told whose point of view it is. One of the things I liked about this is we get to see through Vectal's eyes human culture. One of the things that often comes with trying to write from an alien species perspective is trying to write how humans speak English without just writing down English, making it sound weird. And I really think Dixon nailed how to do that from Vectal's point of view. At least until the language barrier gets crossed. That's I'll deal with that later. The species, the sec, I believe it's called, the seek, I'll put it up there, I don't know how it's supposed to be said, is also very interesting. And what few glimpses and hints that we get through Vectal's point of view up till we reach him is actually very interesting. And it kind of makes you want to learn more about him as his species in general. However, one thing I need to be clear before I get too deep, I'm not going to really be able to talk about this book too much without going into spoilers. So unfortunately, I want you to keep that in mind as we get into this next section. So, spoilers, but Vectal's people, the Seek, Sock. This comes in as a complaint. The world building on this is, Vectal's people, the Sock, are actually aliens on this small little asteroid / planet. Apparently, they crashed on this planet 276 years ago. That is the exact year we were given. And as since then have sort of devolved back into a primitive culture. On the surface, this seems fine, but when I thought about it, it didn't make sense. To me, 276 years doesn't seem like a very long time for an entire race of people to completely forget about their origin. Vectal is flabbergasted that Georgie might be from the stars where his own people came. He doesn't understand how ships work despite the fact that their Elder's Cave is basically a gigantic spaceship. That still works and has an AI on it. So there's a lot on here that I just simply don't understand. The only way for the species to have completely forgotten its roots as spacefaring alien people would be at one point, like 50 years after they crashed, everyone just decided, you know what, we're going to stop telling any stories at all about us being from spacefaring society, pretend everything is just a primitive culture, and live like that. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense how, again, the spacefaring species doesn't remember anything. After 276 years, mind you, is my point. If this was like 2,000 years ago, that would make sense. Maybe even 1,000. But 276 is way too short of a time for me to buy that they've completely devolved back into caveman. Like, I would even buy, like, more primitive Iron Age kind of stuff a little easier than complete cavemen. Honestly, in my opinion, Dixon could have completely nixed this entire plot line, and it probably would have been better overall. In fact, the only reason it really feels like Dixon put this part in here was to help Georgie cross the language barrier by going into the remains of their old spaceship and basically getting a brain imprint of the Sock's language so she and Vectal can talk normally now. And that brings me to another complaint I have. Well, okay, so this language barrier crossing is good in practice. In theory, I found it a little weak, but in practice, the language barrier thing is good. But the why it's good leads me into some other complaints. You see, Vectel's people, the Sock, have a symbiotic parasite within them that helps them adapt to this this Tundra-like planet. Now, this thing basically raises the body temperature along with other things, and in addition, it also creates a filter for them because this planet's atmosphere, though breathable, contains high traces of some kind of chemical that will slowly poison you the longer you're on the planet. This works for both the Sock and the humans, apparently. Now, this sounds interesting from a world-building perspective, but what it definitely has a negative impact on the relationships that it's built. For example, the first thing is that this parasite chooses the mate for the Sock. And it does this by basically ramping up their libido and desire towards that person anytime they see them, which is often heard as sort of a purring in the chest. However, how it chooses the mate is where things start to get iffy. You see, it chooses the mate based purely on the genetic compatibility between the person that they're in and the person who is most likely to give them a baby. And it's just one of those. This creates a big issue for me, especially when the entire book is centered around the relationship of Vectel and Georgie. Putting aside the strange heteronormative relationship standards that this creates, one of the things that bothers me the most about this choice is it removes so much agency from the two people involved in the relationship. For me, I'm always a person who's a little bit more interested in the emotional resonance of people rather than the physical attraction between them. So, yeah, while I'm sure it's steamy to some people to just watch two people who are clearly attracted to each other that just paw all over each other, when I'm reading a story, I'm more interested in the emotional connection that they can have, especially when that's the center of the story. And because of this parasite choosing someone based solely on the fact that they're the best person to have a baby with, and then ramping up the libido and just drive to have camel with two backs with them, it just sort of it creates this unfortunate implication in my mind. I mean, the Sack even talk about how two people in their society who hated each other bonded and were forced to become basically husband and wife for the most part, and kind of just had to learn to love each other because their parasites didn't give them a choice. And to me, that's an uncomfortable feeling, especially when you consider that. But the reason I say this ruins the relationship is because it doesn't feel like Vectel's helping Georgie because he likes her. He's helping her because he really wants to stick it in her. And unfortunately, we see from his point of view, and that's actually pretty much why he's helping her. Not only when he's just trying to help her, he's just thinking about, well, I need to stick it in her, and, helping her is the best way to make her more appeasing to that, since she doesn't quite have the same parasite yet. But when they find out about the other human women, one of the main things that gets focused on is the fact that Vectel's tribe doesn't have a lot of women in it, and the human women can help substitute their deficit in women. And it's just one of those, the more they focus on that, the less comfortable I feel with the scenario that's currently happening. And it creates even further because these parasites are needed to live on the planet. When there's this big ultimate choice about whether the humans want to get the parasite to survive on the planet or wait for rescue, there is no choice. It's an ultimatum, not a choice. The women aren't going to get off the planet. They'll die first because the planet's slowly poisoning them, and it's extremely cold, so they'll probably freeze to death before that. So it's not really this big heroic moment when Georgie decides, I'm going to get the parasite and stay on the planet to be a wife. It's, what other choice do you have? And the moment they get the parasite, now they're bonding to the people who had bonded to them already. And now no one has a choice in who they sleep with, basically. And yes, while there is an occasional, well, they didn't really bond with anyone, it's just one of those, it ruins a lot of the romance for me. And when that's such a big part of your book, that's an issue. Especially when the human women are trafficking victims. Okay, so I'm going to have to talk about this next part. And this next part's going to come with a very heavy trigger warning. It's important that I talk about this because I need people to understand what kind of book they're getting into if they decide to pick this up. So without further ado, since I can't say it due to YouTube, this following trigger warning is going to be attached to the next section. I will put a link, I will put a time code down below to skip past it, and I will remember this one, unlike my previous one. So, for a few seconds, take a look at the trigger warning. Guys, okay. For those of you still here, let's get into this. So, when Georgie and the women are first kidnapped by these aliens, Ruby Dixon unfortunately falls into a very negative trap that a lot of authors do. It's often male authors, but female authors seem to do it too on occasion. So Georgie and the women are captured by aliens, and Dixon really wants to sell us how despicable and evil these aliens are. We've already gotten a good point of this. The fact that the women are being treated like cattle, the one person who has a translator, basically, it was just jammed into their ear like a cattle tag. They are forced to share a cargo hold where there's no bedding or anything, and they just have a single bucket to go in, like relieve themselves in, along with just getting basically garbage food to hold them over, along with the very clear hints that they're basically surplus, and that the women who are really the prime targets are in stasis and have no idea what's going on. Despite all of that clearly showing how evil these aliens are, Dixon goes a bit further and uses the R word for shock value. Basically, one of the characters that is introduced is a girl named Dominique. Now, when both Georgie and her wake up, they're both told, do not scream, the aliens hate it when you scream. Now, we're obviously left to our imagination for that, but Dominique doesn't take the warning like Georgie does. And when Dominique screams, the aliens come in and... Thankfully, it's not described. I will give the book that credit. Dixon at least just lets us have our imagination do most of the work rather than describing it in detail, which I'm very thankful for. But the way she handles Dominique afterwards is just horrible. Like, Dominique is clearly traumatized every time they mention her, and is clearly a woman who needs some help after what happened to her. However, when Georgie is finally coming back with Vectal, they find Dominique's frozen corpse in the snow. It turns out that while the women were waiting for her to arrive, Dominique just got up one day and sprinted off into the snow. Now, there was a good element here to be really tragic, to just talk about how awful this was, how awful it happened to her, and mention that, you know, it was a horrible thing that happened to her, and there's no sugarcoating it. If it had stopped there, I might have just slid this under the rug and just mentioned that it has this as a fair warning. But no, the thing that Dixon does that really makes this an issue is basically after Georgie comes back and tells everyone, hey, yeah, I found Dominique and she's gone. The entire group basically responds with, well, she didn't want to live anyway, so I guess it works out. And then from that, it's over. Dominique is never even brought up again. And it's just one of those, wow, that was just such a poor mishandling of such a sensitive topic that I couldn't even I had to set the book down for a day or two just to deal with it effectively. And it's just one of those, there was so many better ways to use it, and the only reason it's in this book is for the pure shock value of it. And that is a horrible way to use this kind of subject. And it really brought the book down in my eyes. Intentionally or not, Dixon implies that the best outcome for a survivor like that is death. There's no attempt to try to heal her mental issues. No one talks about it after she's gone. No one even tries to really help her. It's just, I guess she died. That's what she wanted. Guess it all worked out for the best. Anyways, hot guy. And it's just one of those, you should have just cut this storyline entirely. It was not needed, and it brought your book down so much. In the end, I'd probably give the book a 5 out of 10. I mean, this book wasn't bad, and at several points I felt that there was a better and deeper book buried underneath all of what I read that just never really came out. And unfortunately, it didn't want to do that because it's an erotica. And that's fine to some people. For me personally, though, again, yeah, I'm not a huge erotica fan, so I'm not terribly experienced when it comes to the genre, so I can't tell you what's good or bad in regards to that. I personally would not recommend this book if you're an SA survivor, because I don't think that it sends the right message about who you should be as a person afterwards. I guess, though, if you're just looking for someone who, an erotic story about boning a blue alien, I mean, I would recommend playing Mass Effect personally, but if you want to read something, feel free to pick this up. I mean, it's not my thing. I probably wouldn't. I don't think it personally deserves Mount Doom, despite a very heavy temptation to put it in there based on what I talked about. But that's just more how it handles the material rather than the writing itself. Again, it might not be as bad as you may not see it as bad as I'm making it. I just personally hate it when authors use that kind of sensitive material for that reason. I guess after that, the Christmas mood has kind of been brought down a bit. I mean, it's kind of hard to just go back into the festive season with that kind of sensitive, heavy material hanging over us. Maybe this year I'll be skipping Christmas. But until then, remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having. Even the bad ones. Hey there, everyone, this is Afrodo Reviews here, coming at you with a little bit after action thing. This is going to be the last video that probably has it, but I'm going to warn you guys again that I am currently doing a giveaway on my channel. The book, I'm giving away my best book of 2021, called Beacon 23 by Hugh Howey. This is a great book, and it's to celebrate my 100 subscriber milestone. If you want to get involved in that, feel free to go to that channel, leave a comment saying you want to be in it, along with your favorite book of 2021. Honestly, next year I might just skip 2022 and say 2023 since I'm doing it so late. That's not the point. Anyways, yeah, without that, I'll leave a link down in the description below. Please join in. I'd be happy to give it to you. Well, not give it to you. I'd be happy to let you win it. Bye!